Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our session. Thank you for coming up so early in the morning. I know it's been a rough week. My name is Mavi, and I lead the Azure Information Protection Customer Experience Go-To Production Team. Now, I know this is titled as long as Khaleesi from Game of Thrones, but hey, winter is coming, and we all need to be prepared. With me, we have Enrique Sagesse.
Customers understand and deploy our products, and I also help our product team or engineering team understand our customers. And the idea today is to show you what they've been doing for the last couple of years on the information protection front, and also to introduce ourselves so we can work with you on deploying these wonderful products.
So today in our agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about what is Microsoft Information Protection, some scenarios on how to accelerate the deployment in your organization, and we are going to share a customer experience story. So we have a guest star today, and he's actually working for a company that has been nominated #1 out of Fortune 500 for the 6th time in a row this year. This is the largest company, I think, in the world, may I say, and let him introduce himself.
Hello, good morning. I'm Alan Corright, Enterprise Technical Expert with Walmart's Cybersecurity and Compliance Group. Today I have the honor of being able to present to you some of the stories from Walmart, how we selected AIP among the field of options in the IRM, DRM world, as well as some of the challenges we had deploying. Like all of you, large organizations face unique challenges, and so I'll share the challenges, how we overcame them, and even a couple of that are still outstanding that I'm able to work with Mavi and Enrique on to help better the next generation. So thank you, and I'll see you in a little while.
Because, everyone's been asking us, yeah, you're telling us what to do, how to do. We want to learn and hear other customers, so we have Alan here. Okay, so let's start with the introduction to what is actually Microsoft Information Protection. Back in the days, not that long ago, all information was on-prem. We had firewalls to protect all the data inside the organization. We didn't have that much of a technology. Everyone wanted to work. They worked on their users, devices, apps, data. Everything was on-prem. Nothing has happened. But today, as we move on to the cloud and technologies are getting better and better and more complex, we need to find a better way to secure our data. So, we have less boundaries. Everything is out in the open. Employees bring their own devices to work. We have laptops. You name it, we have it. We have several iOS, Android, Google, whatever you want, we have it. So what Microsoft has been working on is a comprehensive solutions that we are calling the Microsoft Information Protection. It covers basically 4 pillars. It's doing the discovery, it's doing the classification, it's doing the protection, and it monitors everything that is happening. It actually do everything like across all devices, all platforms, worldwide, wherever, whenever, we're here to protect. So how do we actually do that? We do content discovery. It can be transport rules, it can be DLP, FCI, AIP, of course, and MCAS. We do the labeling and classification that can also be the FCI Exchange, SharePoint, and obviously AIP. Encryption and protection, again, the rights management service comes to play here. We do EFS, we do Office 365 message encryption, and we do Windows Information Protection. And we do all the tracking and monitoring with all our tools, obviously the RMS tools, the classification logs, the Office 365 compliance, and the MCAS alerts, and Windows Defender ATP. All these can be achieved with what we are calling today as Microsoft Information Protection. Okay, again, this is not a product. This is not one thing. This is a comprehensive set of solutions across Microsoft. Okay, so just in a glance, so you'll be able to see, we have a lot of solutions. This is only partial list, by the way, and just so you know, so we have the Azure Information Protection, the Office 365 DLP, Office apps, obviously ISV. We have our MIP SDK. There's a great session today, later on in the day. We'll point it out later. Strongly suggest that you attend this one if you need to work on an SDK. And all the things that you see here, and again, this is only partial list from what we call the Microsoft Information Protection solutions. All right, coming up next is how you can actually leverage the deployment of Azure Information Protection in your organization today. What we hear from our customers is, okay, that's great. I want it, and I want it now. And how do I do it in the most efficient way, fastest way, just to get started, and then we can actually go to more complex things. So we're here to actually help you learn how to do it, learn from our best practices, also listen to Alan later on, and just get started. With that, I will hand it to Enrique.
Thanks, Mavi. So as Mavi said, this is a family of products. It might be, let me be very clear, this is not a marketing term, this is an actual thing. It's a SDK and a series of DLLs and components that are actually being implemented across all those products. But if you say, well, I want to protect my information with Microsoft, you have a long road ahead because, as you saw, there are many products, and you may choose to use some and not others. You may decide to deploy some niche solutions. But it's a very big family, and you may be wondering, how do I get this done quickly? Well, there are some things that our customers have told us they want to achieve as rapidly as possible, and we've come up with the ways to get that done very rapidly. The first one is I want to understand my data. I want to have an idea of what is important, what isn't, what I should protect, what doesn't matter. And they want to do that without changing the way their users work. They want to do that without introducing breaking changes in their environment, etc. Another one is to be able to quickly, very rapidly, be able to tell their upper management what's out there, what's our level of risk, what data is exposed, what data, if something bad happens, where will it happen? So for that, we're going to describe the scenario of deploying the AP scanner in discovery mode. Which, again, is something that you can do very, very rapidly. Companies also have very complex challenges around protecting data that is being shared with others, with their partners, suppliers, customers. And protecting business-to-business data has multiple phases, but there are some scenarios that are extremely straightforward that you can deploy overnight and enable protection of the most important pieces of data that you need to share. We're going to show you that. And finally, this is something that is very important, especially in specific markets. There are companies that have extremely sensitive data. It's well identified, it's well localized, they know what it is, and that is the make or break data in their company, and they want to make sure that it is protected at all times. With that scenario in mind, we can also enable protection for that data without affecting the rest of the environment in a very efficient and rapid way. So let's talk briefly about each of these scenarios. I want to understand my data. How do you understand your data? By classifying it, using classification. Data classification is a great tool. In itself, data classification doesn't do much for security, though it can be complemented very easily with other elements in your IT environment to add protection. But you can deploy manual and automatic classification very rapidly across your organization thanks to Microsoft Information Protection, and in particular, Azure Information Protection. You can teach your users to classify data. You can auto-classify data. And then with that, you can do reporting to understand what's going on, where is your data, how does it look like, who has it, who's creating it, how is it being shared. You can use content markings like headers, footers, watermarks, things like that applied automatically, so your users know what type of data they're dealing with and increase awareness, increase efficiency. And you can also implement edge-level controls like DLP rules, transport rules, things like that to say, well, I don't want top secret data to be leaving my company without authorization. That kind of scenario is relatively easy to implement. Of course, you can do much more, and we hope you will do much more once you deploy these. For example, you can apply protection, you can apply encryption, you can apply restrictions, access controls, lots of things like that, all as part of the AIP product, and it's relatively straightforward to implement. But those changes normally take a little bit longer to test, validate, to make sure your users understand the consequences of what they do. So applying just classification as a first step, without breaking anything, without annoying anyone, you can do that very, very rapidly. And Until recently, we had some limitations in that area. Well, actually, today we still have some limitations in that area. In particular, the support for Mac, Android, and iOS is not to the same extent that we have in Windows. During this event, I think yesterday, we announced the support on Mac, iOS, Android, and also on the web interfaces for our data classification. So most likely by the time you are deployed with these, you'll have a great level of support in all the platforms and a very consistent level of support in all the platforms. So, talking about classification, what is labeling? Labeling is what you use to do classification. Basically, it's metadata written into the documents, into your files and emails. That metadata, it's a tag that says this is confidential, this is public, this is personal, this is whatever it is. And that metadata travels with the documents. When somebody classifies a document, that document travels around and it keeps that data with it. That tag allows applications to know what it is. So for example, if you have a firewall, you have a transport agent, you have an exchange, they can look into that metadata and say, okay, this is important, this is not, I let it through, I block it, or apply other behaviors. The metadata is clear text, so it can be read by applications. It can also be used to trigger other behaviors, such as content markings, as I mentioned before. You can put visible content markings in the content. For example, you can put a header that says this is confidential, so the users know that it's confidential as well as the computer. And it can be obviously fully customized to adapt to your business needs and to your existing classification methods, to your company's culture, and to your languages, etc. So how do you do this? You can create your own labels or customize the defaults, which are a great starting point for most organizations. The recommendation is when you first create your labels, do not start with protection. Think about protection, but do not enable it right away. You want your users to become familiar and relaxed around classification. The last thing you want to do, and this is a common mistake when you deploy a classification solution, is to train your users to lie to you. Let's say you say, well, whatever is confidential is going to be read-only and only accessible to these people and cannot be printed, cannot be sent outside under any circumstances. The second time a user sees a document that is confidential, they're going to classify it as public because they're going to hate that. They're going to hate all those restrictions. So you train your users to lie to you, and then the whole system is useless. Start with classification. Don't do anything extreme regarding protection. You can do some cases of protection, but very relaxed. Let your users get familiar with it. In essence, we're talking about boiling the frog here, making sure that your users get used to classification, and by the time you add more restrictions, they already accept that classification is the way to go, and they already have a familiar understanding of what is confidential, what is public, etc. In general, it's recommended to do labeling mandatory because users are lazy. They're not going to click on one extra button just for the sake of security or anything like that. Now, making it mandatory for documents and emails tends to be kind of annoying because especially for emails, because you send 100 emails per day, you are being asked to click 100 buttons per day, and that's perhaps too much for the users. So one thing you can do is to define some defaults and say, my emails by default are going to be internal, and if it's other thing, you have to click on a button. And for documents, you make it mandatory, you put no defaults, and your users are mandated to click one extra button every time they create a new document, which doesn't happen every 5 minutes, so it's not too much to ask. Then you deploy the AIP toolbar to all your Windows devices, so users start seeing those labels. And then you do an awareness campaign. This is critical. AIP is a simple enough product that doesn't require training. You don't have to train your users on how to click one button, one classification button. I want to show you how it works, and it's extremely simple. So you don't have to teach their users how to do classification. What you have to do is to explain users why classification is important, what each of these labels means, and how to react and how to behave around them. We have created a bunch of materials for these, for helping users understand classification. We have created quizzes, posters, things like that you can customize to your organization, and you can deploy in your bathroom stalls, in your walls, everywhere, so your users get used to understanding classification. Please contact us if you need that information. And with that, you increase awareness about classification. And then you use the reporting capabilities that we announced this week to track adoption of classification, to understand how the data is being classified, to let people know if they're falling behind. If you have some departments that are classifying less than others, then you send them an email saying, hey, you are behind. Make sure that you teach or you tell your users to do the right thing here, and you continue tracking. Once that is well established, which takes a few weeks, you can start enabling more aggressive settings. For example, adding protection, adding watermarking, and other settings that are part of the AIP offering. Let me very rapidly show you how it looks like.
Before Enrique does, has anyone here deployed AIP already? Nice. Everyone here is engaged. Who's engaged with the CXE team?
A few hands. Nice.
Great, okay.
And I see some familiar faces around.
Yeah.
So this should be the most boring demo ever, because the idea is that it's simple. It's almost stupidly simple. I have a document. I'm working on confidential stuff, and I want to tell it's confidential. I click on the confidential button. That's it. I'm not going to do that, because one thing that you may want to do along with the deployment of classification is deploying automatic classification. And you may have your own keywords. You may have the need to detect credit card numbers. You may have the need to detect other sensitive information that can be programmatically detected. AIP can do that. In the case of Microsoft, for example, or legal department, they use some jargon, some terminology, such as attorney-client privilege. And when somebody types the keywords ACP, which stands for attorney-client privilege, a document should be protected as confidential. So we show a recommendation there. We chose to use a recommendation because sometimes the word ACP can mean something else instead of automatically classifying the document. But if the user says, OK, yeah, this is confidential, then the document gets automatically tagged as confidential. You can see that in the classification toolbar, and you can see that we added a header, et cetera. It cannot really get simpler than that. And in this case, at Microsoft, we are applying protection in addition to just tagging the data. In fact, for this kind of data is quite tight classification. It's because our users got used to it first. And now they accept that, for example, if something is ACP, they're not going to be able to print it or things like that. But that was hopefully a very simple demo, and it doesn't require much more to understand how classification works. Deploying that, again, takes days. It's extremely simple. When you get into the protection stuff, obviously you have to validate, for example, that the encryption that we're applying doesn't block some behaviors, doesn't prevent you from indexing stuff, that kind of thing. So that's a little bit more involved project. Oh, sorry, wrong computer. So the second scenario, I don't want to wait until my users have started classifying data and gone through months of classifying data to start seeing what's out there. I want to know what's out there right now. I want to be proactive and find everything that is in my organization. So if you have repositories, in particular on-premises repositories, which may be lacking advanced discovery features, such as file servers or older SharePoint versions, and you want to find the data that is there, we can help. We have, as part of the AIP solution, the AIP scanner. The AIP scanner is an agent that you deploy on premises, and that goes to your different content repositories and discovers what's out there. Once the data is discovered, it can be reported, and then you can enter in panic mode if what you find there is terrifying, and then take additional measures such as applying protection and securing that data. It can scan most on-premises repositories, such as NAS devices, CIFS devices, SharePoint server, et cetera. It can discover what's out there and match it to your policies. So if you deploy classification policies, you can match it to those labels and say, well, this contains credit card numbers, so it's confidential. This contains social security numbers, so it's top secret. You can do that kind of stuff. Or you can say, just discover what's out there and report to me if you found credit card numbers, social security numbers, or whatever it is. You can customize these rules and say, discover part numbers, discover account codes, whatever you can define as a pattern or a keyword. And then you can report on it. And you can either do custom reports by looking at the logs and presenting specific details of what you found, or you can take the standard reports that we provide in the portal and use those for awareness. How to deploy the IP scanner? I'm not going to go into details here. We have a theater session this afternoon at 1:15, I think, where we're going to show how to deploy the IP scanner in 4 minutes. Kevin said it's 5, but I'm pressing him. It's going to be 4. And it's extremely simple. You need a server, you need a database, a SQL database to put the data, and then you just configure a few PowerShell commandlets, and that's it. It goes, it finds your data, and it reports back. In particular, deploying the IP scanner in discovery mode with all content types means I'm not going to tell you how to classify data. Just tell me what you found. Tell me if you found credit card numbers and how many. Tell me if you found social security numbers, etc. And you can configure that with one PowerShell command. You say discover all information types, or discover information types all, and that's it. We're going to go into details this afternoon. If you want, show up to that theater session, and we'll put some pressure on Kevin. Once you have that done, you may move to the next problem, which is I have emails that contain sensitive data and that need to be shared with my customers or with my partners. Or maybe I'm an organization that deals with consumers and I'm sharing their data, which contains PII. I'm a medical organization, an insurance company, I'm a school, and I want to secure all those communications. But the challenge is I want to secure in a way that doesn't annoy them. They are my customers. It has to be easy. It has to always work. So in these cases where I have to send sensitive information to other businesses or to other individuals, whichever is the case, you want to have it protected. In most cases, what you want is to ensure that it's encrypted, and if it's intercepted, they can't read it, and if it's lost, not a problem. In most cases, you don't need to ensure, oh, I want them not to be able to print this data, though in some cases that's true. So in most cases, you want to use the most relaxed but still secure method, which is encrypt and apply access controls, but do not apply usage restrictions. In some cases, for example, for sharing bidding information for an RFQ with your suppliers, you may say, no, you cannot forward it to others, you cannot print it, you cannot copy it. We have the flexibility to do those policies, but the starting point is usually be relaxed, deploy encryption, and don't add additional capabilities until this is well established. There are many ways to do this. One of them is tell your users to classify data, and then when they send it out, the emails will be protected because the classification can trigger automatic encryption. Another one is let's create a transport rule that looks for that kind of data or that looks for specific scenarios, like a school principal sending email about health situations to the school students' parents. That flow is going to be automatically protected always. You don't have to look into the content. You know that that flow in particular is sensitive. You can create a transport rule to do that. So just very quickly, I'm going to, for those that haven't seen this at work, let me show you how it is. I'm going to create a very simple email.
Okay, you got to switch.
Good point. You're not seeing anything. I'm going to create a very simple email. I'm going to send it to one Office 365 user within my organization, Abby. I'm also going to send it to another Office 365 user in another company, Alan. I'm going to send it to a Gmail user. I'm going to send it to a Hotmail user. I'm going to send it to a Comcast user, a bunch of users in different types of identity systems, different platforms. I don't know what kind of device they're using, what kind of application.
We can send it to someone from the crowd.
I called, and I'm going to start asking emails because everybody else is going to listen. So I'm going to add an attachment, and let's say that both the body and the attachment are important. This is insurance policy information. And if you have followed the previous steps, this insurance policy should be classified already. So the user will not have to do anything extra for this exchange to be secure. In this case, well, I didn't have time to deploy AAP in front of this audience, so I'm going to classify these as confidential. And we have, this is Microsoft policies. I'm going to say confidential recipients only. Now, notice that I didn't do anything special around these. I just selected a policy, and this is the same email for all these users. I have business to business, business to consumer, all that mixed up in the same scenario. So I'm going to go to possibly the worst case scenario here. Actually, let me show. Yeah, I'm going to go to the Gmail case, and I'm going to try to open this. Now, let me show you one thing first. If I went to Mavi's mailbox and I looked at what she received, she will see this email. How does she open it? She double-clicks on it, and that's going to open the protected email. She didn't have to enter authentication, passwords, credentials, anything. She didn't have to install an app. She didn't have to click here, nothing. Why? Because she's using Office 365, and whether it's an internal or external user, they can open it without installing anything or doing anything special. So for them, it's like magic. They just receive an email. The only thing that tells them that this is sensitive information is the fact that they see the classification up there, and they see the protection applied that tells them you cannot forward, copy, whatever. Now, in the case of a Gmail user, I just open it, but here's the thing. Gmail doesn't know about AIP natively yet, and so it doesn't know how to render this email. So what the user has to do is to say, OK, I'm going to read the message. But notice, this is the same email. We didn't fork the conversation. We don't have two different emails going to different people. This is the same email. It's just that it has a different presentation depending on the environment. Some magic that we do behind the scenes. So the user now clicks on the link. And the fact is, I'm a Gmail user, so I'm already authenticated to Gmail. To be for full transparency, if I hadn't done this before, it would have asked me, can you log in? And the user will have clicked on their Gmail credentials, authenticated, and that's it. I've done this before. I practiced my demos, so it didn't ask me for credentials, and it signed in directly. Now, you'll notice that this is not the Gmail UI. This is another web UI. This is the Office 365 UI. So basically, we're using Office 365 for Gmail, which is kind of crazy. But whether the user is Gmail, Hotmail, Comcast, or something else, they will be saying the same thing. They will be seeing a full fidelity representation of the message. They can reply all. They cannot forward or print, because that's blocked by my policies, the sender's policies. They can view the attachment. And they basically get the full experience. They can actually download the attachment. They can view it in the web browser. And they can continue working with me. So it cannot get less annoying than that. In fact, as adoption of Office 365 grows and more users are using AIP and all these, the native experience will become more and more common. But everybody else, whatever device they're using, they will see this. In fact, I tried this on a BlackBerry using Lotus Notes, an old Lotus Notes client with a Yahoo identity, and all that still works. So there are no challenges for the sender, and that's the important thing. The sender doesn't have to be worrying or thinking, what kind of identity they have, what kind of device they have. They just click on the classify button, and then they send that as an email, and that's it. So, but if that isn't easy enough, what you can do is to create a transport rule. And you can say, well, I'm going to create a classification for confidential. And then you create a transport rule that says, if the email is confidential, apply this policy. Or you can say, if the email contains these kind of keywords or social security numbers or whatever you're looking for, apply this protection and don't require that the user classifies the email. So in that case, there is zero effort for the user. Oh, one more thing. When that Gmail user, I didn't show you that, but if the Gmail user replies to the email, the sender doesn't get the Gmail experience. They get the same native Office 365 experience, so they see it in place, in Outlook. They don't have to click any extra buttons because, again, we didn't fork the message and created a web version, a non-web version. It's all the same. When the user replies, it continues working as a regular email experience for the sender and for any other people that are copied in the email. So, final scenario. The benefits, well, I already said that. Basically, it's minimal friction, minimal effort. It just works. And you can either protect the emails before they are sent, so all the emails are protected across the whole environment, internally, externally, et cetera, or you can just protect them on egress. You can create a transport rule that says the email is not protected until it leaves the company. And when it leaves the company, we want to protect it. And that way, you don't have any worries about anything inside. When the data leaves the company, that's when it's encrypted. In general, we recommend encrypting every flow, or when the email is internal, external, it doesn't matter. If it's sensitive, it should be encrypted, but you can choose depending on your priorities. Final scenario, the crown jewels. For those businesses that have extremely sensitive data that is easily identified. For example, an oil company having oil exploration data. Those are billion-dollar spreadsheets. Unannounced product plans. You're planning the Xbox V Next, and you want all the details. You know where that is. You know what it is. Critical intellectual property, natural resources exploration, VIP account, like you're a Swiss bank and you have these 50 accounts which are paying you millions, and you want to make sure that you give them the highest assurances. Unreleased financial data, mergers and acquisitions data. When we were about to buy Secure Island in order to build all these, we didn't want anybody to know that we were buying Secure Islands because that might drive their share price, and then we end up paying twice as much. So we want to protect that data. That information is relatively easy to find, what we recommend in those cases is centrally located and bulk protected. That is, again, something that can be done in a week. You can protect all your information's data with AIP, but these are things that you can do overnight. How you do that? Find the data, use AIP PowerShell or the AIP scanner, classify and protect that data. If the data is not centralized, you have to deploy the AIP client to the users that are dealing with that data and tell them to classify it so you can find it. And apply restrictive rights. Do not copy, do not print, still allow the users to do their jobs, but restrict the data and the operations that they don't need to perform normally, but always provide an escalation method. For example, regular users cannot forward this data to external people, but managers in that division can. So a regular user needs to share something outside of the organization, is one door away. They go to their manager and say, hey, I need to share this with this supplier. I know it's super confidential, but they are working for us on this. They change the policy and they share it. So always provide an escalation method because, again, the last thing you want is your users lying to you and saying, this is all public, so I can't do my job. And then use AIP reporting, content tracking, and all that to find where that data is and to weekly report how it's being used, how it has been shared, where it is located, who reclassified that. If I have a top secret document with new found oil field in this country and I don't want others to know, I want to check who read this document every week, and I want to make sure that if there are any exceptions, any risk factors, I can report on that. And the reporting capabilities were announced yesterday. You will be able to look at them by the end of this week. And basically tells you where your data is, the full inventory of your data, and what classification it is, soon we're going to add the reclassification information to show you who has downgraded the security of a document, that kind of thing. And with that, those are the easy deployment scenarios. What Walmart did is not the easy deployment scenarios. They are doing the full thing. But Alan will be able to tell you how to deal with this in an extremely large, complex organization with all the challenges that the most complex and large organizations have. Alan?
Thank you. Thank you all. I actually want to follow up on something Mavi said. She asked who was deploying AIP already, and there were a few hands. Who's looking to deploy an IRM or DRM technology and is looking for information to select something for their business? About half the crowd, maybe more. Excellent. Thank you. So what I want to do is present some of the decision making, some of the selection criteria that we chose, making certain that we were making the right decision for our business, not only today, but down the road in the future. Talk about some of the components. Enrique did an awesome job lining out the technologies and talking about what they are. And what I'd like to do is translate that to some of the business terms on the back end. What are you going to have to support later on? Because something has to be paid for now and paid later. Eliminating roadblocks. Obviously, Walmart, a very large organization with a lot of endpoints, nodes, configurations, versions. And so making certain that we have compatibility and deployability across our enterprise is key for us. And so there are challenges we have to knock down, most of which we knocked down, a couple of not. This is something that actually Mavi and Enrique and I have been discussing for months, and even as recent as yesterday, about how to, what changes could be made in the product in the coming future that you all can look forward to that would help not only drive our business, but make your lives easier as well. Why AIP? It might be natural for some organizations who already have AD RMS to move on to the Azure RMS, the AIP. For those who already have their identities in the cloud, the same cloud makes a lot more sense because you've reduced some of the complexity. It's going to be available for you in the same platform. Integrated technologies with Exchange, SharePoint Online. Again, when you're reducing the complexity by removing some of the additional hops and steps to other providers, it's going to make a faster, more seamless transition for you. Business continuity. I actually wanted to list a bunch of DRM providers who had gone out of business in this space, but I thought it might be maybe a little less tasteful given that they might be in the room. So I listed a few from the movie industry, the music industry, the ebook industry. There's some organizations that are going to be out there today that won't be there in 12 or 24 or 36. And so for us, we wanted to make a selection, choose an option that was good for us, not only today but tomorrow. Trust. There's a lot of trust in the relationship that we've got with Microsoft, and they've been around for a really long time. It doesn't require a second or third party access. Again, talking about the seamless nature of having everything in one cloud. I don't have to then provide another piece of access for someone to move over to the location of my files. A list of audits and certifications. It was interesting when we were trying to evaluate and figure out which provider would be the best option for us. And Microsoft has a very long list of certs that they've got on there. In a previous life, I used to do some auditing for organizations, and there are things on that list I don't recognize. So I appreciate Microsoft for going, in my opinion, above and beyond and trying to figure out what they can do better for their environment. And not listed on the slide, a lot of trust for letting me speak last. Vision and continued growth. This is one area where I think Microsoft has been absolutely instrumental. They not only have this great conference here where we get to hear about the new products, new services being brought out, but we get to see the last ones already implemented and growing, and we get to see the roadmap. They're very transparent. They share the roadmaps with us, and it's something we can appreciate, whereas some organizations, even with the relationship with an organization as large as Walmart, they don't want to share the roadmaps. So if we don't know what's coming down the road, if we don't know that they're committed to growth, it's not something that we're interested in. So what are the pieces and parts? AIP sometimes can be a little nebulous, at least to some customers. It is one cohesive set of technologies, but what are the technologies? And what are you going to have to support and own later on? You've got your core piece, your Azure RMS. That's where you're going to set all your policies, your templates, all the components inside that are basically defining what it is you're trying to identify, label, and protect. Your client, you are going to have to put software down onto the workstations. You want to make certain that you've got someone who can deploy it and configure it. The AIP scanner, for everything existing in your on-prem solution, file servers, you want to make certain to go back and identify where those files are and classify them. Even if it's an open encryption to your organization, later on in the presentation, something that Enrique mentioned, I think Mavi as well, keeping it simple. It's easy to say, but it's sometimes hard to do because someone with a grand plan has come down and let you know, here's what I want. And that complexity can definitely make it harder to use some of the technologies later on. And so you want to start simple. Enrique had mentioned that you want to start even with just a scan. Don't necessarily go back and encrypt. Don't protect now. Tell me what you saw. So I can iterate from experiences in definitely a large organization to any size organization. Start simple. That doesn't mean you won't grow later on. Security is not a check mark. You're not going to do it today. You're going to evolve over time. Start simple. The Office 365 policy. So some of the DLP functions of AIP are actually in other components inside of Azure. And so you want to make certain that you've got relationships with your Exchange teams, your collaboration teams, if it isn't owned in one organization. And finally, your AIP connectors and IRM. So the connectors allow other services like Exchange Online, SharePoint, to be able to go through a proxy to get back out to AIP so that it can do the decryption for you, so that you can have those functionalities without having to have software on your system. So what about ownerships? Licenses is one piece you're going to need across multiple components here. The policies, templates, it takes a while to create some of these. The canned out of the box, they absolutely can work for many organizations. If you need more customization, you're going to have to put time into it. DLP is definitely a special area. Anyone who's done DLP knows that you can put something down, you are going to have to own what it finds. There are tickets, there are teams that are going to have to go back and either do remediation or provide information to your leadership on why those pieces of information are in files across your organization. The clients are software. Software has to be upgraded. No real secret there. The scanner has a different licensing model, and that's something that we were even having a conversation about yesterday, how either that could be made more simple. I don't think it's necessarily complex today, but it's something you need to understand. So take note of that. And finally, IRM and the Azure connectors. That is probably the simplest piece. You lay it down, you install it, you walk away from it, but somebody's got to own those servers. Knowing what's in your environment, keeping it updated, you've got to make certain that you're always patched. So what are some of the challenges that an organization the size of Walmart faced, and what did we do to overcome them? Like many of you, we want to protect our data from leaving our environment, and so if we've got DLP protecting, stopping data from leaving the environment on the edge, the egress, we also have a decryption zone. We make certain that information doesn't leave without us knowing about it. AIP is a security client, and it wants to make certain that no one is interrupting its signal as it's making a secure connection. So as soon as it sees a corporate decryption zone, it treats that exactly like it is. A man in the middle. It says, that's a man in the middle. I'm not going to connect. So if you've got one of those, you need to put in an exclusion. Make certain you route around that. Users and computers. This is also easy to say. Users aren't computers. The challenge is when I have to deploy software to a computer to upgrade it, but I have to license the user. For organizations that have no asset management or a simple asset management, this can be complex. It doesn't have to be with making a few changes. Something that I worked with Enrique and some other Microsoft contractors in our contract. Excuse me. This is something where I was able to create some extra automation, and that's something where I provided it back to Microsoft, and I'm even willing to collaborate with you all, obviously offline, and provide information to you so that you can make better deployments in your organizations. DNS, this is just a really simple one. The Azure connector, the AIP connector, it has to have one call to DNS. Give it something. If it can't see through the proxy, let it go on. Organizations, not all organizations have the exact same user ID and email address, your UPN and your email address. For organizations who have either been purchased or renamed or purchased other organizations and consolidated into an email scheme, the first authentication that normally happens with your office is Outlook. In the morning, everybody starts up Outlook, it connects, and that authentication typically happens through email address. Doesn't have to, but typically does. That's not something AIP is going to use to authenticate, so you need to understand that AIP has its own authentication, be aware of it, and take it into consideration when laying down your configuration. Mac authentication, the Mac experience is a little bit different. It's not, it's not terrible, but it's different, and so you need to have your expectations set with your executives who have Macs. As well, you need to make certain to put the UPN, if it is different from your email address, in the email field of the Outlook client. Migrate crypto modes. This should be easy, but sometimes you forget the little things. If you have upgraded from crypto mode 1 to crypto mode 2 and you migrate to AIP, make certain not to only migrate your crypto mode 2 keys. You might not be able to unencrypt some of your older emails. Licensing confusion. Licensing. I had it titled differently, but one of my corporate attorneys helped me fix that. This is a challenge. The licensing is something you want to keep up with. There are different names in different places. There are functionalities out of products that are attached to service plans that are part of SKUs. It's a little complex. It's not terrible, but making certain that you have it all lined out and communicated when you're making changes, especially when using something like dynamic groups. Being able to populate licensing for your users based on a dynamic group makes this simple. And so leverage some of the other components inside of Azure. It really can take all of the administration away as long as you have the right thing. And so you want to communicate with your other organizations, maybe email teams, maybe SharePoint teams, maybe Intune teams, whoever's using the other functionality, be transparent as much as you can. Keeping it simple. When we first started, we decided we wanted to use a large number of scope policies. That was pulled back a bit. We made a lot of decisions where we had grand plans and we pulled back because the simple works well, and then for your edge cases, then add the additional complexity. Don't start with the additional complexity. I think it's something that Microsoft has put in every one of the presentations, and not all of us listen, so it really is great advice. What about the remaining challenges? Office 2010, Microsoft has not been shy. They've been completely transparent. That's not something they're looking to go back and support now for modern authentication. If you've got Office 2010 in your environment, AIP can be installed there. It can work. It's going to take more work on your part and possibly on the part of your customers. Be aware, upgrading is simpler sometimes than trying to reconfigure everybody's workstations. Parity between platforms. The platforms, there is a difference between your Windows clients and your Mac clients. The Windows clients will show the labels that we've been talking about, and the Mac clients will show the template names. If you migrated those from some other platform, if you call them different things, it now has a loss of parity. They're not going to be the same names. It can be confusing to your Mac users, executives. Multi-tagging. This is something near and dear to my heart. For the classification of data is something that I'm pairing with Mavi and Enrique on, trying to make it where not only one piece of metadata gets attached to your email, but actually multiple, depending on what's inside. Instead of saying that it's just PII and I've got to encrypt it because PII sometimes includes Social Security number, what about when PII doesn't? In most countries around the world, it means name plus something else. What if it's name and address? I don't want that encrypted. I don't need to. I'm not trying to protect something that can do a company harm. But if it's name and Social Security number, now I want to. So the scenarios we've come up with that may be in a future product, maybe, hopefully, let's talk about it here, is that if we could have something labeled as Social Security number, if we can have a second label that says PI, a third one that says because of a Social Security number, and a label, it attaches to a label of highly sensitive or whatever your highest classification is, a third one. It'd be great to have multiple labels activated at once.
Note taken.
Thank you. Finally, justification. Some of the features that you've got available in AIP, some of the options you can put in front of your users, whether it's up classifying, whether it's down classifying, making some of those selections, there are some justifications available. We're looking for a little bit more, and so that's, again, a partnership with Microsoft, and they have been an awesome partner. It's not often you find someone who's willing to listen to the needs of their customers in such a way, and then challenge back, could you use this, could you use this? That might work, this won't. It's great to have a dialogue open, so if you've got Microsoft representatives or online chats, by all means use them. They're great resources, and I appreciate them. And so to wrap up, it's not easy for an organization our size to make selections. There is nothing that fits our organization. One size doesn't fit all, especially when you're the largest. People come in and they help us to deploy products, and we know there are going to be challenges. There are going to be problems. And so we work with our partners very closely. They work with us, they listen, and we make each other better. And I can certainly appreciate what Microsoft has done for us, and hopefully not only can they do something for you, but reach out to me. If you've got questions beyond, obviously, what's in the presentation, I'd love to take the conversation offline, try to help you all make better decisions for your environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Well, as Alan has written, like if an organization size as Walmart can actually implement AIP, obviously, so can you. But to wrap up, we always suggest start simple. Start, with the simple use cases, don't overdo it, and deploying AIP is a journey. You need to have everyone engaged, especially the stakeholders and your end users. If the end users will not be engaged in that process, you will end up with a broken deployment. So you need everyone on track. You need to educate them. You need to have them understand what they're doing and not just tell them you're doing that because we said so. No one likes it. And once you go over the label taxonomy, we always suggest either use out-of-the-box Microsoft label taxonomy because we spend so much time doing all the thoughts and consideration that everything will be logical to end users. Don't just use, we used to, back in the days in Microsoft, we had HBI, LBI, and MBI. Raise your hands if you know what that means.
Some angry faces there.
Microsoft people.
Only Microsoft people would understand. Like, seriously? So LBI, HBI, and MBI is low, high, and medium business impact. Never used that as a label taxonomy.
Been with Microsoft 21 years, got trained on that every year, and still I couldn't tell you what is HBI, LBI, or MBI. It's just, don't go with whatever is there already. Just try to make sense of it and make sure it makes sense to your users.
Yeah. So What my team basically does is we're helping our customers deploy AIP worldwide. We have a team that is spread worldwide, and we help our customers deploy AIP. We do best practices. We help them translate their business use cases into actual AIP policy. And we're actually the bridge between the end customer and our engineering team. We help prioritizing bug, feature request. Do you have any feature requests? I didn't see any. Everything is perfect. Yeah, everything is perfect.
We're done.
We're done. So we help them. We help also documentation, but I do recommend also using our amazing resources. So we have our documentation, we have our Yammer, we have our bot. If you'll stop at our expo, yeah, we'll stop at our expo, take a look at our new bot. We have our user voice to help you just, suggest any features that you want to see, and then my team is actually monitoring that and helps with the prioritization and business justification. Related sessions, if you want to take a picture of that, these are all the related sessions that has Microsoft Information Protection related, especially to AIP. I think we highlighted the scanner and the MIP SDK session that are happening today. There is also a lab that is happening today at 11. I strongly suggest to attend that one as well. It's a hands-on lab. We're there to help you actually configure policies, see how it looks. Okay. And as I said, there is a Microsoft Security Challenge. Do it in the expo if you want to win.
Very cool.
Only number 5 exists. And right now we can take questions. So anyone has any questions, feel free to either ask me, Enrique, or obviously Alan. I'm sure you have a lot of questions to Alan.
We finished like 20 minutes before the end time. This is the first time it happens to me, and I get normally it's 20 minutes over, so we have plenty of questions to handle, plenty of time to handle your questions.
Or we can show you a lot more with AIP.
If you have questions, please approach the microphone or yell from your position, and we'll repeat the question.
I have a question. Is the Microsoft on perfect? We are introducing AIP in our infrastructure, and we have it running, but we are really hard struggling with two-factor authentication. Have you been able to solve this? Because right now there's a nice dialogue asking you for the second factor, and if you press cancel, it will just open the document.
So the question is about the integration of second multi-factor authentication with AIP. There are two sides to that. One of them is for the intra-business access to data. We have a feature in preview, which is a partial implementation of the feature. It's not a full preview, which allows you to say, any content that is classified that requires protection will require multi-factor authentication, or will require a conditional access policy, which might involve multi-factor authentication. You can say, for example, you need to be in a managed device or have multi-factor authentication or things like that. That works well, but it's only for all content that is protected. You cannot say top secret content requires MFA and confidential doesn't, that kind of thing. Also, we only check when your client certificates expire. So we only check that once every 30 days. So that's why the feature is in preview, because it's not very flexible. There are some challenges around implementing a more granular solution. Basically, the authentication model that we use in AIP is not very well aligned with requiring authentication on every call. We are fixing that. We're working to allow for you to establish policies that say, top secret requires multi-factor authentication, confidential doesn't, and to require it every time you open one of these documents if the policy says that you need to. So that's in the works. I think it's early next year because there are some significant changes needed to our authentication stack in order to enable that scenario. For now, if your requirement is very absolute and you say, well, I need multi-factor authentication for sensitive content, you can implement that today with the preview. But it's going to become much more flexible as we implement these new features. The other common request is around business to consumer. If somebody, if I'm sending an email to a user with a Comcast email address, I'm going to use a one-time passcode for accessing the data. I want to be clear that that's not multi-factor authentication. Some people see that as a one-time passcode that looks like multi-factor authentication, but it's not. That's the authentication. It's the single-factor authentication is that one-time passcode. So it's an email validation thing that we do. It's not MFA. We are working So when we enable the multi-factor authentication intra-business, we can also enable it business to business and hopefully also business to consumer. But what we have today with the email and the one-time passcode is not multi-factor authentication. So let's not mix those two features. I'm not sure if I answered your question. Or...
Answered it.
Okay.
Another point which might be important for multiple companies, if you have sensitive data, you would tend to store the key material on-premise. And that would be also great if this can be better integrated, because also there we have this challenge that this multi-factor authentication is even not working much better there.
Yes, today we have an option for handling on-premises keys, which is hold your own key. It's a solution we do not recommend in the general cases for niche scenarios. Basically, the current implementation is you have ADRMS on premises, you use the cloud service, and for some labels, like the top secret labels that you say, this data needs to be protected with an on-premises key because of all these requirements, you basically tie those labels to your on-premises deployment. It has significant limitations. Multi-factor authentication is one of them. We have some solutions for that, so we can discuss those, but basically you can enable certificates-based authentication in IIS on premises and require multi-factor authentication, but it's only for some platforms, so it's not a complete solution what we have on premises. We're currently brainstorming on the future of the on-premises component. We're not, as you probably noticed during this conference, we are not too excited about on-premises stuff. Well, we prefer the cloud. But we realize that in particular for some scenarios, in some customers, on-premises still makes sense. We want to enable a full hybrid solution that gives you the best of both worlds. We're working on that. We don't have a current timeline for addressing things like multi-factor authentication and more flexible policies in the on-premises stuff. But we're thinking about it. We are not forgetting about on-premises. It's going to take a little bit of time for us to complete that picture. But for now, we can work with you. You can enable certificate-based authentication, at least for Windows devices, and have a partial solution at least.
Thank you.
Let's go to the sites, and then we go back there.
Sure. A lot of folks in my industry, we all use journaling to third-party archives. And we're just experimenting right now, but I guess what we've observed the behavior is that you get the message journaled to the recipient with two attachments, encrypted and unencrypted. I haven't been able to see that documented anywhere, so I just want to kind of ask if that's the behavior you're intending to do, and that's where it's going to be long-term.
So you're talking about journaling of emails and attachments?
Yes. So if you've turned on OME and it's journaled to the third party, what we've observed is that you have the two attachments. One is the encrypted form, one is the unencrypted form. So is that, but I haven't seen it documented anywhere.
It's not documented for third parties, but if you look at the Exchange Online journaling functionality, there is a function that's called journal decryption. It's described for the internal journaling in Exchange, but the same APIs, actually, here's how it works. Let me summarize it. When a message goes through Exchange, the first thing Exchange does is decrypt it and sends it to a special pipeline in which things like indexing, e-discovery, and journaling happen. The message, the decrypted copy of the message is put, in that case, in the journaling pipeline, which then sends it to the journaling mailbox. And we also attach an encrypted copy, so there is like a chain of custody. This is the originally untampered version. So if somebody challenges and says, oh, no, yeah, that's not my email because you touched it. Here's the original one. Do you want me to decrypt it now? And then you have them. So that pipeline is also connected to properly designed third-party journaling solutions. They connect to the same spot. So the same behavior that you have in Exchange Online journaling, you have it for many other journaling and also e-discovery solutions that plug into the Office 365 journaling transport decryption pipeline.
Is there any scenario where I could break third-party journaling with one of these policies, where if something is...
Only hold your own key. If you're using hold your own key, that by design is opaque to anything. It's like only you can see it and talk to the cloud.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. Can you share with us some news about some PDF clients, probably?
Yeah, we have great news today. Actually, I think it's going to be in the session this afternoon.
Also in the session this afternoon, and I think it was also announced yesterday in our keynote session.
Yeah, so Adobe has been working with us to implement natively AIP in Adobe PDF. So we already had support in most other third-party PDF clients like Foxit, Nitra PDF, and a few others. But Adobe was the elephant in the room, the one people want to use and didn't support AIP. Now, there are some kind of breaking changes there. Adobe said, okay, I'm doing AIP, but I don't like your file format. I'm gonna modify the standard ISO PDF format to support AIP. They created this new variation of the format, which is great because we want it to be the standard. And they created this new format, they support it. We just shipped our client that supports the same standard. Now, there is some work ahead to put that into the SDK. Actually, that was done already, but also to put that in SharePoint, for example. When a file is protected by SharePoint, it needs to use that format and not the old one that we're using. It's going to be a few months of transition until Adobe actually ships what they built, and we also have that in SharePoint and all the other products. It's probably a few months of path until we get there, but at that point, we're going to have the same file format with protection and in all the known important viewers of PDF.
So we can say January 2019 probably.
I cannot give a date for a third party, but that's kind of the rough time
It is
we're
coming.
thinking
Thank you.
of. We have a question here.
Yeah, I saw a demo of what's coming up with combining Azure Information Protection with the functionality of Security and Compliance Center. But they weren't able to tell me when that's going to be released for the GCC. Any insight you can provide?
GCC, actually the product is available in GCC today. It was released about a few weeks ago. The integration of the unified labeling experience with Office 365 and that should not have a delay other than the deployment of the new version. So as soon as the new version of Office 365 in general is deployed to GCC, you should have that unified labeling as well. There is no particular challenge in unified labeling that will delay that. We're talking about a few months until this GA is because we do not deploy previous to GCC. So we're talking about maybe end of the year. I recommend that you check in the AIP booth in the Expo. Ashish Ramdas owns that, and he can give you details on the timeline and implementation of AIP and unified labeling and all that in GCC.
Okay, thank you.
That's Ashish is his name, and he owns this stuff.
Appreciate it.
Okay. And I'm sorry if we're not taking questions in order because we can't really see you.
Maybe
Just
that
a
one, yeah.
dark splotch there.
So first of all, thank you for your excellent presentation. And it sounds like from what you've said so far today that this really is a cloud-centric solution, and you really can't get value out of it unless you're already in the Microsoft cloud. But you also talk about future support for hybrid and maybe on-prem alternatives. But do you have a time horizon for that? Is that like 1 year, 2 year, 3 years out? What do you foresee for that?
Okay, let me clarify what I said. Today we do have a hybrid solution. It's not the nice one. It's basically the cloud service defines the policies, and you can have a cloud key and an on-premises key. And then your content can be protected with one or the other depending on the level of confidentiality. That enables you to have your key on premises, it enables you to have your login on premises, your authorization and authentication on premises for that policy. The policies are still defined in the cloud, so the labels and all that are still defined in the cloud, but it basically ties down to that on-premises agent. And that meets the needs of most customers. There are some scenarios it doesn't cover. For example, a military organization that has disconnected bunkers. Well, you have to have a connection, even proxied, or at least you have to be able to take the files exported from the cloud service and put them on premises. We have seen that as well. There are some things we don't like about that solution, aside from it being on premises. But for example, the mobile device support it has is a little bit poorer than the cloud version. It doesn't support multi-factor authentication. It doesn't support good business-to-business collaboration, though we are actually kind of happy with that because the idea is that if you're going to be doing business-to-business collaboration, you should be using the cloud. We are starting the analysis process for that. So far, what we've been trying to do is to ship that one, to have that one in the market, even though it's not our favorite topology. We wanted to have it out there, and so we are able to get feedback from customers because we don't want to build a completely new product based on just our imagination. We wanted to ship that one there. It's being deployed. One thing that we learned is that that's a slow topology to deploy. The customers that have been deploying it, maybe it's their nature. Maybe it's that they have so many compliance requirements that things take time, but it's been a long journey for those companies deploying the hybrid solution. Once we get more feedback from the field, we should be able to close on a future and a roadmap. I cannot give you dates for that, but it's just starting. So I can assure you that it's not going to happen within the next 6 months. I could guarantee that.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
This is kind of a follow-up to the previous guy talking about third-party archivers, and you mentioned hold your own key. So do you mean like the bring your own key in Azure too? Does that apply? So if we worked with Talus, got an end shield, uploaded our own key, turned customer key on, if we're journaling to an archiver on-prem from our Exchange hybrid, are those emails basically going to be encrypted and do no good if somebody opens them up? If we turn that on, it's encrypting email with that customer key.
So that restriction that I mentioned is only for hold your own key. Bring your own key, the difference between bring your own key and customer managed key is what Microsoft can do with the key. Like we cannot export the key, we cannot have the key in clear text, we cannot mess it up. We cannot just say, hey, here's your key and give you somebody else's key. Because the key is locked down, we cannot do any export at all. Physically, we're locking ourselves out that key with bring your own key. But we can still use that key. Okay. So we use it for the purpose of providing the service, including the full set of functionality available for AIP protected content with a Microsoft managed key. It used to be that Exchange didn't integrate with bring your own key, but that was because of the way in which Exchange was integrated with AIP at all was give me the key. So basically Exchange requested a copy of the key and then it did things on its own, which obviously goes against the whole idea of bring your own key where we're saying the key cannot be exported. But now that we solved that and Exchange talks natively with AIP, all the functionality like journaling, archival, indexing, discovery, and all that works, and the content is as transparent to Exchange as the content that was protected with a Microsoft managed key. Okay. Hold your own key is different because that key is on premises. Right. The cloud cannot call on premises for license. You do not authorize that, and we don't do that. And if you did, basically the whole idea will be useless because if you're going to give access to the cloud, why bother to put the key on premises? So it's a specific hold your own key limitation and not. As long
as email's all going through Exchange Online, and that's what we're concerned with, UAOK is fine.
If the content is protected with a cloud key, whether it's hold your own key, bring your own key or Microsoft managed key, and it's going through the cloud, we can do the archival indexing. In fact, one new feature that we released is the ability to do that cross-tenant. So if one organization sends content to another organization and grants rights to that recipient organization, they can do journaling, they can do indexing, they can do all that. That doesn't mean that all their users get access. We don't break that. But since we trust the code for Exchange to do the right thing, we implemented it so that once a user has access to the content, we enable the whole spectrum of functionality for the recipient organization. So both sides can do journaling and all that. So it's fairly transparent that it works.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I just want to say great presentation. My question is actually very simple. So you showed us an example of sending something confidential to multiple recipients, and majority of your recipients, not Microsoft, basically got an email notification to click on a button to basically see the confidential information, which is hosted in the cloud. So my question is there any way to customize that?
Yes, actually, you can customize the user interface shown to users when they receive a protected email. There are multiple things that you can do. One of them is coming soon, which is mandating that interface. So for all recipients are going to see that way, which might sound like not ideal because you want the best possible experience, but maybe you want consistency. You want everybody to see the same experience. We're adding that feature. But then when they see that, you can customize the header, you can put your logo, you can customize the colors, and you can customize the text. There are limits to what you can customize. You cannot add links, for example, things like that. It's just static text that you can customize plus logos, but you can do that. And now one new feature that is coming next week, I think, is the ability to define multiple customizations for different parts of the organization. So saying my Xbox team is going to have the Xbox logo, and the SharePoint team is going to have the SharePoint logo.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I might use that.
Is there a future roadmap item to support fingerprinting?
That comes a lot lately. So the platform was built with fingerprinting in mind. The idea is, we used to have a very ad hoc implementation, like the whole protection, encryption, all that was like coding the app that did all that. We abstracted all that into the MIP SDK. So basically, the client application sends the content to the MIP SDK and say, do your thing, and the MIP SDK right now does encryption and the tracking and all that. But we build it so things like fingerprinting can be added to the MIP SDK. The nice thing about MIP is that Microsoft for once put all that effort into one single thing. It used to be in that slide that Mavi presented, 10 different technologies for doing the same thing across the whole family of products. That means there's thin spread efforts. Now, when we build machine learning and artificial intelligence into the content analysis, that's going to be available for all those platforms. When we add dictionary lookups and hash lookups and exact matches, that's going to be available for all of them. Hash lookup is related, for example, to fingerprinting. You're going to be able to provide a list of hashes of content to look for. So you don't have to provide a list of keywords to look for. So you're not revealing to the IT department what's the next company you're going to be buying, for example.
Right. So you can give a dictionary of all those things, and then it will hash.
You hash them, you upload the hashes, and we match the hashes. That's coming. Actual fingerprinting, meaning that we hash the content and we output the fingerprints so another system can, for example, discover the fingerprints, is something we're looking at. In fact, we have some very fancy, extremely cool scenarios that I cannot discuss, but center around that. So that we're looking into, cannot guarantee they're going to be deployed because they're in exploration mode, but...
Enrique, I would suggest that you will attend today's session.
Oh, yeah.
It's BRK3246.
3246?
Yeah, the fourth one, which will, basically, you can raise your question there as well. Maybe you'll get more dive answers from the person who actually...
Well, the people building the SDK.
Very much a dictionary, and we use a current solution that we'd like to move from that is a dictionary scenario where...
Yeah, the dictionary actually was already implemented in the code in Office 365, and I think it's in preview right now. Since we are using the same backend, that's going to go into our SDK and then into the AIP functionality. So the dictionary lookup and hashing and all that will be there.
You're welcome. I think you had a question.
Okay.
1 minute, good to go.
One more?
Yeah, probably it's my fault I missed it, but now the labels from AEP can be used really in Office 365 for DLP and so on and so on.
So what's the question?
The question was, these labels that we create in AEP can be used in Office 365.
Yes, actually, I think we already passed that session, but it was yesterday. There's this thing called unified labeling, which means that the old label thing and exchange message classification and SharePoint DLP and all that is being converged with AIP.
No, because I've seen, probably it was an old screenshot, but you used to match the IP label in the DLP from Exchange.
Yeah, no, but right now we're doing it manually. It's like look for the metadata. Okay. We're putting that natively, which means that the labels used by Exchange for message classification and the labels used by SharePoint for classification are going to be the same thing. So you're not going to have to define the labels on both ends. You just define them in one portal, and they go to AIP, they go to MCAS, they go to Office 365, SharePoint, to Exchange, and all that. They're all going to be using the same labels.
Because I have a customer that is in military, and they want that if a document is tagged top secret, then it cannot go on the cloud.
Yeah, that's one of the scenarios, yeah.
And I've seen that with MCAS we can do it right now, but on SharePoint it's very difficult, or in OneDrive it's very difficult to do it right now.
We have some methods to do it now. It's kind of, you said it right, it's difficult, but it's possible. But it's going to be aligned in a matter of a couple months, so it's in preview. So you can do it now in preview, test it, and by the time you have to do it, probably it's going to be already GA.
Perfect, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
And we are 1 minute over time. So
Yes, so we did it. All right, thank you. And if
thank you, and
to
we're
reach
going to be here
out-
for your questions.
Yeah.